Well, thanks for having me. So over the next 20 minutes, I just want to give a bit of insight into the work that we've been doing in voice and AI, and then in particular on some of our latest development around Beeb. So I thought by first of all, giving a bit of insight of why voice for the BBC. And for us, it kind of really started back in 2017, where our former DG, Tony Hall, said that voice is going to be a key a way we interact with media, search for content, and find what we want. Right, so that was a really great mission statement. So if we look into what that's looking like in the market today, what you see here is a graphic that on the left-hand side shows the percent of UK adults that claim to have access to a device that can be controlled by voice. Now, I think let's call it a market reach of almost 90% is really quite high. And what you see on the right-hand side is how in June 2020, people would go and split that up into the types of devices in which they think they have voice control. Now, it's pretty much dominated by the smartphones. However, we've been really watching the smart speaker market, and we see this growing quite significantly over the last couple of years. What is really interesting with the smart speaker ones is that if you are an individual that has a smart speaker, the likelihood that you've got multiple of these is really quite high. And we see this, which is a couple of graphics taken from voicebot.ai, who do every year this consumer report. It's really quite interesting if you're interested into voice to just see what the adoption is looking like. And if you can see on the left-hand side, actually people are putting these everywhere. I've been watching these graphs for the last couple of years, and the bathroom in particular is expanding. So really interesting. But if you look at the key major areas like the bedroom, the kitchen, and the living room, what's really interesting for us is that used to be the key places where people have their radios and their TVs. So right, you can see these devices really appearing in those areas. Now, what you see on the right is the different use cases that people predominantly use these devices for. Now, there is really quite a number, in particular in the top 5, where we as the BBC actually have a real core offering. So we strongly believe that that's an area in which we need to be. I need to caveat this slide in particular just a little, because this is based on US figures. So we actually see radio, for example, here is quite a small one. That's actually, when you look at the UK stats, it's a different proportion. Now, but however, we really see these trends to continue to rise. So, which puts us in good that we want to we have this big vision that by 2025, people will be expected ubiquitous human-computer interaction predominantly through voice. On this really notion of any device in any location. Right? They will expect the media to be both ever more personalized and present in our lives and come from a wide range of sources. And trust will become increasingly important and increasingly difficult to establish. So this investment that we're putting into voice and AI for us is really let's call this bridgehead into this next generation of services. And really that by investing in voice right now, we hope to get it right? And then it really puts us into a good place for these future services that we envision in these scenarios. Now, that really leaves us to answer two really fundamentally important questions. So the first one for us is an editorial challenge, really to figure out how do we extend our core mission to inform, educate, and entertain into this new conversational medium. And then the other one, which I'm really quite heavily involved in, is the corresponding technologist questions, like how do you really create this right environment to enable that conversation? So I want to give you a bit of a story of what we've done so far. And it really very much started with platform integrations. So we currently have 3 main products on the Alexa platform. So the first one to talk about is our interactive children's experience, which allows you to play games, get access to songs or stories, which was really excited because we won a Webby for this last year. Then we have our interactive news offering. So that's basically a set of news bullets that you can either skip or you can ask for some more information about these. We started that as a trial for the Indian elections, And that was done as an integration on mobile into the Google Assistant. But we've now kind of released this for the UK. So kind of like on Alexa, you can ask for the news and then you can get our interactive experience. And it's something that we're updating like 3 times a day. So it's really quite up to date. And then there is what we refer to as our Alexa main skill, which provides access to all of kind of like our audio live and on-demand catalog. We also then do kind of little experiments. And one we did, which was really quite nice and successful, was a collaboration with Radio 1, James Craig, What's My Age Again? So that's kind of like a game that he plays on the radio. And what we did is we had these prompts that when the kind of like game came up, you were actually able to go and interact with that on Alexa. So it's a really nice way to really see kind of like, is this kind of this notion of pushing us towards a more kind of like personal interactive radio experience. And kind of like after the game was done, it just naturally blended you back into the live stream, which is really quite a nice idea. So just to give you an idea of numbers, the BBC skill reaches roughly around 1.5 million users a week. And kind of like our news offerings are around the kind of like 600,000 users a week. Now, if you want to kind of like dive into a bit of architecture, so this is an example of our main skill architecture, where we're heavy users of AWS Lambdas. We use kind of Node.js as the kind of execution environment. And what's really crucial for that is it gives us this really kind of quick ability to scale up and down. So what tends to happen is that we see a lot of usage in the morning, which is when the nation wakes up, and then kind of in the evening, and people kind of returning for work. And that kind of infrastructure really gives us that ability to handle those loads whenever they appear. The other thing which we've kind of been working on is look at the types of tooling that we need to really start scaling these kind of interactive experiences and what that might mean. So we've created a tool that's called Orator. It really kind of provides this, on the one hand, this user interface where you can build these kind of like, call them branching narratives, where you can kind of really do almost like, would I say gameplay? Or it's just really how do you tell the story or the experience that you want your users to kind of go through. And at each one of those points, you can do like clips or interaction that allows people to just really interact with the experience that we're building. So it's the UI that you see here. And then there is this component of what we refer to as a kind of like story engine, which then when one of these stories kind of gets instantiated, it really handles kind of like state and where within the interaction you are and what kind of like media needs to be played. So this is kind of like what powers the children's skill, for example. Now, there are, however, some kind of like long-term strategic aims. So let me just go through to one of them. And that is like anyone here on this call who's kind of thinking of going into the voice space, there is a kind of really big dominance of the market from both kind of like Amazon and Google. Now, I don't think I'll be doing the job that I do right now without the kind of advances that these kind of like tech giants have brought to us, right? With in terms of the tech in order to actually make voice possible, and then also kind of the availability of these devices, right? However, they do really kind of require you to work within their kind of like ecosystems. And for us, there is a certain element of that in terms of kind of like lockdown restrictions of what we can actually do, which we kind of like really see as a hindrance for us to kind of like innovate it. But then the other kind of like really important thing is that on these kind of like interfaces, you always mediate it through a third-party assistant, right? So it's their voice that's kind of like talking back to you. And it's a really significant challenge on the customer relationship and kind of like brand attribution. And for us in particular, it's that connection that's a kind of big concern to us. And we see it really crucially important that we keep on having that direct connection to our audiences. So with that, we partnered with Microsoft to create Beeb, which is kind of like full end-to-end assistant. And kind of with launching Beeb, it's really about building a voice assistant that kind of like users can trust. And then Beeb went into beta on the Microsoft Insider program in June. So if you've got a Windows 10 device and you're part of the kind of Insider program, then you can go and get the update and get it from the Windows Store for you to try right now. Now, the other thing I think it's worth really clarifying is that the Beeb really is not a rival to Alexa or anyone else. Really, it's a service that we can integrate in our own technology, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more, and that kind of really of others. So it's really about how do we enable that conversation directly with the BBC. Now, it really won't do your shopping. It won't kind of like turn on your lights, right? So this is really all about the thing that the BBC has always done, right? Which is about informing, education, and entertaining. And so then reinventing that for this kind of like new technology space. And the aim here really is to be a partner, to make Beeb kind of like available as a service on as many platforms and places as possible. So enough talking, let me actually go and show you what it looks like. Now, I should say, Beeb is a signed-in experience. I won't show you kind of like that kind of step. So it skips directly into the actual experience. It's also what you see right here, this would be the absolute first time you interact with it.
Okay, Beeb, what can I do?
I'm new, so I can't do everything, but you can ask me to play any of the BBC's radio stations, shows, and music mixes. Or if you're curious like me, you might like a podcast from BBC Sounds. You can also ask me for the weather or the latest news. Why not give it a try by saying, "Okay, Beeb, update me."
Okay, Beeb, update me.
Hi there, welcome to your update, a quick, personalised catch-up from the BBC. For now, we'll use the location from your BBC account to give you the local weather, and over time more and more of this update will be tailored to you. Let's get started. Here's the weather forecast. The temperature in Greater London is 23 degrees Celsius. It will become rather cloudy in the afternoon, although it should stay largely dry, remaining warm and breezy. Here is your news update.
Hello, it's the BBC News.
I do think that in shops, it is very important to...
Right, so that's kind of like a small insight into how it looks like when you're using Beeb. Now, I did say that this is the first time when somebody goes and interact with it. So you see that this is kind of quite wordy in the interaction, but it's really all about for us to explain exactly what's happening so that we are taking part of the information that you have in accounts to make this kind of like personalized in terms of the location you are. So I think it's really important that we continuously explain how these services are kind of being brought to you. Now, this is still in beta, and I really to stress this, and we need to still do quite a bit of learning and analyzing and kind of like fine tuning, but we're really keen to iterate on that now, and hence releasing it at this kind of like beta level. So the next thing is I wanted to just give a bit of insight is kind of how we're actually approaching building this. Now, you've seen that it's the product that we refer to as Beeb, but then actually underneath Beeb, or the way that kind of like Beeb is assembled is through a number of different services. And we kind of refer to these number of different services as this kind of like conversation as a service platform. And that's really quite important because there was this kind of like really large vision that we put out about this whole ubiquitous computing, and voice is going to be a key element of how we interact with this. So we kind of really see that there's these kind of like two elements, right? We have on the one way Beeb, which is a product from the BBC that brings you content from across the BBC and beyond. And then we have the conversation as a service platform, which really allows all of our products to integrate voice functionality quite efficiently. So you can kind of see Beeb almost as one instantiation of CAS, because a voice assistant is what I would pretty much call like a full stack of the kind of like web world equivalent. But then really depending on what your product requirement is, you can then go and choose, and depending on the interface that you want, through that then enable voice or conversational functionality. So let me jump into that as a little bit of like this 1,000-foot kind of like pipeline. So what you kind of see here is a really high level abstraction of what actually happens underneath the hood. So in the Beeb example, we have a user talking to a device that has wake word capability. By that, we mean there's something on the device that listens for a particular phrase. In our instance, that's OK Beeb, to then decide if it should go ahead and trigger an app to then kind of like take over. Similar kind of happens on Alexa and kind of like Google as well. So when this app kind of is triggered, it takes the incoming speech and it throws that over to a speech to text service, which its responsibility is to take whatever the audio is and turn that into a string. We then take that string and we pass it over to the so-called natural language understanding service. What this kind of NLU service basically tries to figure out is, so what's the so-called intents and the kind of like entities. If I use an example of OK Beeb play Radio 1, it's really about figuring out what's the user's intent in this instance playing. what does he or she want to play? It's Radio 1. It's once we kind of know what the intent and that entity is, we can pass that further down the stack, in this instance, into our dialogue management kind of framework, which then decides what kind of like backend services to call to then formulate a response and send that back to the user. So you saw in the Beeb example, there was a number of times when Beeb was talking, and that is done through a so-called text-to-speech service. Now, the other thing you can kind of see here on this platform, it really depends on or how you kind of want to integrate kind of voice or conversational capabilities into your product, right? So you can either have that on a speaker, on a mobile, on a TV, where you have like literally potentially a push to talk button. However, if you integrate with something like, or against Google or against Alexa, they're just different points. And I think through this, you can really see at what point in time, or why it's really important to have this kind of like full capability across the whole pipeline, so we can kind of really tailor that to wherever we need. And here is just a bit more of a deep dive into the kind of like actually underlying assistant architecture that we've built. So in the Windows case, there's this UWP app running, which hooks into the so-called Microsoft Multi Virtual Assistant Framework, short for MVA, which enables that kind of like specific wake work registration. Now, Beeb is a silent experience, so we need to make sure that we authenticate against BBC account, and only at that point in time are we actually go and able to talk to our system. Now, to surface request, we use something called or commonly referred to as a bot assemble setup, which kind of brings very specific kind of like bots into the ensemble, depending on what it is that we want to do. So for example, when I say Radio 1, that goes to our so-called audio bot. If we're asking for the weather, it goes to the weather bot. The kind of update that you saw goes to something called the personal stream. But we also have a number of bots which are really all about giving us that editorial control to answer certain questions. So for example, we have a bot that deals with so-called sensitive interactions. So when somebody says, I'm down, we can actually provide them access to helplines, etc. In a similar fashion with a persona bot, and I think something that's really fascinating with voice is it actually is one of those kind of example where the audience is talking to you. So you can really decide how your persona of your whole organization should be responding to certain questions. So that's why we kind of have those which use a particular question and answer technology behind the scenes to provide us that editorial control. Now, we've actually already seen some challenges with that current architecture. So we're already looking at kind of like how we can evolve this to really be in a better position for how we enable this kind of like future vision of this conversational companion. We have this kind of like tagline that as a broadcaster, we should never run out of things to kind of like say to you. So the big difference between what we're showing here and what we kind of currently have is that we want to really focus on the kind of like dialogue and interaction layers in particular. So rather than these currently being replicated across various different bots, we're actually putting all of the expertise and responsibilities into these key layers, which are kind of important for a conversational system. Now, if you want to read up about a kind of like similar architecture, I recommend looking up something called Emora from Emory University. So they are this year's Alexa Prize winner for social chat. So Alexa does a challenge for universities to build systems that can hold the longest conversation. And their kind of system is quite similar. And we've also been talking with a number of partners that really show that, yeah, this is kind of the right approach going forward. So I want to finish with a couple of examples of how we've used some of the voice and AI capabilities that we built over the year in some examples. So the first one is our BBC CoronaBot. So this was a chat bot that we built on Facebook to answer questions about Corona. It was quite good because Microsoft's bot framework already has an existing ability to directly integrate with Facebook. And the kind of like key goals that we had with this project was like to understand kind of really the public service purpose, right? How can we respond to the most pressing and frequently asked questions in a really quick turnaround? It also is what's that understanding of how do we build and maintain this kind of like really large topic knowledge base, and also figuring out interoperability, like can we use this setup and actually then put it onto potentially other platforms. So for this, we use the same kind of Q&A capability that I mentioned earlier, and that's put into our kind of like Orator tooling. So it gives us these kind of like nice editorial frameworks. The other key thing with this project was that we were working with the NHS. So they were actually giving us content to particular questions that we potentially didn't have an answer to, and also just to keep that content kind of like up to date and maintained. And I think if you had a chance to read some of the question that people asked here, it also really shows the robustness of the kind of like speech recognition. The other example is adding our text-to-speech capability into our world service pages. And this is really about reading articles in our Beeb voice. So I'm just gonna play this one.
The French version of rice pudding. The French version of rice pudding is firmly ensconced in the nostalgic, comfort food category of grandmother's recipes today, and it's become even more popular during lockdown. Almost the moment that lockdown was announced in France, chefs started posting recipes for French comfort food.
I cut the shot so it didn't kind of like run the whole thing, but I think it really kind of like shows that the kind of like nice kind of voice that we've created, and it's actually able to kind of like read out these articles. So we're really kind of looking into how we can push this wider as a potential feature. So to summarize, I think really with Beeb and Cars, we're on track to establish that kind of like conversational relationship with the BBC, and we're really looking to expand Beeb to really become this kind of like public service companion. I just want to leave you with this quote from Mukul Devashon, our head of editorial for Voice, because I really do believe that the ability to have this connection with our audience and to have this direct conversation is really crucial for us in this world of kind of digital service. And with that, I'll just leave me to thank you for listening.